Greetings all, it's time once again to have a look at some more spoilers for Star Wars Unlimited Twilight of the Republic. And before I get into that, over the next few days I will be away and unable to make these videos because I will be at Onyx Unlimited. So before we get into these cards, last chance, at the top of the video I'm going to mention Onyx Unlimited. It's going to be a large-scale tournament. We're looking at about 55 players right now. Sort of the first large-scale tournament this country is going to get in terms of this game. Here's an updated graphic with all the prize pool that we have now that there's a larger pool of players. The local distributors got involved. We have promotional Grogus, a bunch of other cool stuff. So look, if you're able to come and you're in central New South Wales, or if miraculously you're able to go on a massive road trip at a moment's notice, please do. It's going to be awesome. I'll be there and we'll have a great time. Once again, thank you to all the content creators that have taken the time to spoil these cards. We have here Maindeck, Alliance Dispatch, Tabletop Misfits, SWU Cube, and Valle Jedi. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Links down in the description to all of their relevant spoilers. Go give them some love so we can sort of boost up the content creators following this game and give it more awareness overall. So we have a total of 18 cards to have a look at today. I may have left this one a bit too late. I had to make some X-Wing content, that's why we took a day off. So once again, we'll have a look at these cards in groups, not spend too much time on the less hype cards, but we have another rare base, we have another leader to talk about, and a few other cards that I think are going to be very relevant for constructors. So let's start out with a couple of events. Now I want to talk about these at the top of the video because these are removal or board state manipulation style cards that do affect the overall meta and are definitely relevant to sort of highlight on their own. This is Grenade Strike, and on top of things, starting off with Grenade Strike. Now this is an interesting little removal event. 2 cost in red, it's a tactic. Deal 2 damage to a unit, you may deal 1 damage to another unit in the same arena. And this card offers a lot of flexibility. Now, it's not strictly better than Daring Raid, because Daring Raid can dome the enemy base. But let's be realistic, how often does that come up? The fact that this costs 2 and Daring Raid costs 1, I don't think is really that unreasonable. The ability to remove 2 of your opponent's units is going to be very relevant. Remains to be seen whether this is something you want to play in the main deck. I think certain decks are going to want it, certain aggressive damage-based decks are going to make a lot of use out of this, or like leaders that can deal direct damage like Bo-Katan or Vader. Might get a bit more value out of a card like this. I think there's just a good chance though that your red aggressive decks that are playing things like Daring Raid and Open Fire want this in the sideboard just in case your opponent decides to play a bunch of battle droids and they're not being hyper efficient with their exploit triggers, so you get the winner's opportunity to take out 2 at once, or maybe like something a bit larger in a battle droid. Seems decent, seems good value, and seems efficient enough for constructed play, at least in sideboard, so that's really good to see. Also on top of things, this is a 2 cost cunning upgrade. I said event before, but this does play a lot like an event. It has no restrictions in terms of what unit you can play it on. When played, attached unit can't be attacked this phase unless it has Sentinel. It also adds 2 power and no health. And this is very, very interesting. Basically, as a 2 cost thing, you get the upgrade hanging over afterwards, preventing any one unit from being attacked in yellow seems great. It's like the anti-Sentinel. Plus it also means when it does attack, it gets to attack for an additional 2 damage. It's kind of like how we strap on upgrades before going for a big swing at the base, but this way it can't be killed in combat with that window that you give your opponent. You know, you play the upgrade, your opponent then has 1 turn to deal with it before it has to swing at your base. It doesn't help against, hard removal like, the blue removal events that can just defeat units. But of course you don't have to, actively play into this against the blue decks. You can side it out, or maybe there's a window of opportunity where all their resources are resourced, and then you play this before they have a chance to kill something with a big chunky Sentinel or something like that. Seems like it's nice and versatile. Interestingly, it can be played on leaders, and it can be played on your opponent's units as well. Now, I can't think of any reason to do that. I was thinking like if your opponent has 1 unit on board, like a Darth Vader, and they play Give Into Your Anger, forcing you to swing into Vader the next turn. Unfortunately, there's no window where that works, because after they play Give Into Your Anger, you are forced to then make the attack. There's no window where you can play the upgrade. You'd have to play that on Vader beforehand to prevent that from working, and then you're giving Vader 2 more power. No, that's not a combo just yet, but there may be some kind of upside to playing this on your opponent's units right now. I can't think of one right now, plus one might get printed in the future. We've got a nice little batch of Republic cards here as well. 501st Liberator, Captain Typho, Heavy, and Tranquility. 501st Liberator is an interesting one. It's a 3/3 for 3 in green, Republic Clone Trooper unit. When played, if you control another Republic unit, you may heal 3 damage from a base. This might be constructed playable against really aggressive decks. A decent body on the board, plus it gets to heal some of your base. Sort of doing it all in one card seems okay. I don't think it's something you necessarily want to play in your Coordinate decks. Although I do like these sideboard style effects in Coordinate that give you a body as well, because, you know, it's only one body for 3. Obviously, there's a few different cards now that generate multiple bodies when we sort of get to 3, 4, 5 resources. But it might be okay. It is a one-off healing of your base. It's not like it has the restore mechanic or anything like that. So I think it's fringe and it might be a sideboard card. Moving over to Captain Typho, this is a blue-white 3-cost 2/4 Naboo Republic Trooper unit. When played and on attack, give a unit Sentinel for this phase. And I really, really like this card. To me, this is a much better version of those low-cost Sentinels. There's one with a Coordinate payoff for that Clone Trooper that we saw the other day, plus the Cloud City Guard from the original set. This can only be played in your heroic decks. But given what it's doing, I feel like this is probably for the heroic decks anyway, in terms of the strategies and payoffs. Being able to give a unit Sentinel is just great. Again, back to the General Grievous conversation. It's repeatable. You can target different units, either, you know, give it to your really average Clone Trooper tokens or give it to your really big things that your opponents really can't swing into. Versatility is great. Plus, there's a cool little bonus on this as well. You can give Sentinel to your opponent's units, and there is a good reason why you would want to do that sometimes. If your opponent has a Sentinel on deck and other units that don't have Sentinel, you can assign Sentinel to one of those units, which then allows you to attack that unit with your other units. As long as you are attacking one of your opponent's Sentinels, that's absolutely fine. I think it's like a solid include in the Obi-Wan deck if that does come together. And overall, in terms of these blue Sentinel decks, it's good to see something at a lower cost that's nice and versatile. I think that's great. Moving on to Heavy, this is a 4-cost aggression aspect. 4/4 Republic Clone Trooper unit, Coordinate, Raid 2, and when defeated, deal 1 damage to each enemy ground unit. And in terms of Coordinate payoffs, I like this one a lot. Not because I think the Coordinate payoff's great. It's pretty good, don't get me wrong. It attacks as a 6/4 if you have Coordinate. But the fact of the matter is, it's that other ability that I think makes him the most playable. I don't know if this is a main deck card, but I think red decks are still going to want to have that effect anyway. You know, anything that sort of relies on damage to get through your opponent's units. If your opponent is doing some kind of shield spam strategy, like they're using the Luke Skywalker leader, that can assign sort of random shields amongst his units, this can take out multiple of them at the same time. There's also a weird fringe benefit of putting him in the sideboard of a red-based exploit deck on the Separatists. He doesn't have the white or black requirement, so you can play him, attack with a decent body, and then sacrifice him to an exploit effect and basically trigger that when you want. The when defeated triggers are probably going to be pretty valuable in that deck, especially with some of the cards we're going to look at in a second. So yeah, potentially main deck playable in an aggressive deck, and potentially sideboard playable in other decks as well. I like the design of this card quite a lot. And Tranquility is a 7-cost heroic 7/6 Republic Vehicle Capital Ship unit. It's a space unit. It has 2 triggered abilities. When played, you may return a Republic unit from your discard pile to your hand. And on attack, each of the next 3 Republic cards you play this phase cost 1 less. I like the way these 2 abilities play together. My biggest concern is something that costs 7 and then gives you a resource reduction cost on units as it attacks. At that stage of the game, you may not have multiple units ready to go kind of thing, and that means you're not getting the value out of it. But the idea is when you play Tranquility, you automatically get 1 more unit into your hand anyway. By the time you're paying 7 resources, it's very unlikely that you won't have a Republic unit in the discard pile. And look, if you don't, that's a good thing. It means you're probably winning the game anyway, so that's fine. It's got okay stat lines, but realistically, that recursion is what you're paying for. 7 cost for a recursive effect on a okay body. It seems alright. My biggest concern is the Republic decks aren't going to want to invest so heavily in something with this kind of effect. I know there is sort of a bit of a sub-theme growing of when you attack, units cost less. That's cool, but at the same time, it costs 7. When we're looking at sort of like these mid-range early cards that can like generate out multiple bodies, I just feel like there's a lot more efficient things the Republic can be doing. Perhaps in an Obi-Wan style deck, if he plays a large collection of Republic cards, this could be relevant. Comboing with things like Captain Typho, you can give Sentinel to Tranquility. That seems like an okay kind of effect. But like your green-red decks that are trying to trigger coordinate, I don't know, it might be alright top end in those decks. I just think they can lean a bit more into that strategy and get a bit more value, a bit more synergy. So it's okay, not a very exciting rare in my opinion. Alright, the next group of cards we're going to have a look at all sort of feed into the exploit mechanic. Although it might not look at it at first glance, let me explain, because they absolutely do. In a few different colours as well. It'll be interesting to see if exploit decks do sort of become a thing in Constructed, what colour they tend to lean into more. These all have the black aspect. In red we have 00M Series Officer, Squadron of Vultures. In blue we have Calculating Magna Guard and Wartime Trade Official. And in yellow we have Tactical Droid Commander and Wartime Profiteering. So let's start off talking about the two cheapest cards we have here. 00M Series Officer and Wartime Trade Official. The reason I want to talk about these together is because they are both turn 1 plays with on-defeat triggers, and I think that is going to be a crucial thing for the exploit deck. And I gotta say, I wasn't really that excited about blue in terms of exploit, but a unit that makes another unit when it gets defeated seems pretty good. That seems like a great way to play into exploit triggers. This is the kind of card that can lead to some of those cheaper exploit payoffs coming out as soon as turn 2, a decent amount of the time. And when you use exploit on him, well, guess what? You also get another battle droid to use exploit in the next couple of turns as well, which is awesome. Also, a 1/3. I don't hate that. It does allow for the possibility of this unit to attack, deal some damage, possibly eat one of your opponent's units if they've got like a 2/1 or something like that. It can happen. If they have the 00M Series Officer, that seems like a real solid trade. You get to do that. You keep your unit behind. Yeah, they've domed your base for 2, but then they don't have the option of using the battle droid for their exploit shenanigans. After that, you can exploit the unit, and then you have another unit to exploit afterwards. Seems good. Cheap units that can make units on defeat, I think is going to be really, really good. If blue can make it in exploit, and we'll see how that goes. In terms of the battle droid, this is something that you can use to lean into a more aggressive style of exploit deck. Dealing 2 to the base, depending on the strategy you're using, might be kind of irrelevant. It doesn't really affect the board state, doesn't affect your opponent's units or your units. But if you're planning on just charging down the base as fast as possible, dealing 2 early on seems pretty decent. Plus again, it's a body on turn 1 that is relevant for exploit, lets you exploit out things on turn 2. Speaking of which, let's talk about the 2 exploit cards, Squadron of Vultures and Tactical Droid Commander. Now, Squadron of Vultures is just another big stat card that has the exploit keyword on it, like the Hellfire tank. It'll be interesting to see what we do in terms of how we construct exploit decks, because there's going to be a certain point where there are just too many options. We can't play too many exploit units, otherwise the deck is just not going to function. You're going to draw too many exploit units and you'll exploit a bunch of things once and then you won't have the fuel to get to the next one. The composition is very, very important. So I think just these big stat units like this in the Hellfire tank are not going to be super relevant and constructed. Obviously great in draft, just good stats, more common cards to draft to make the archetype work. I think what gives us a chance in constructed though is the fact that it can come out for free and it's a space unit. If you exploit 3 different units, yeah, you get a 5/4 in space, and that's not irrelevant. It is possible to get this out on turn 2. Say turn 1 you play the 00M Series Officer, turn 2 you play the Battle Droid Escort. Hopefully if you're lucky you get the option to swing in with one of them so they're not just being thrown away immediately. But then you get to sack both of those and the extra token that the Battle Droid Escort makes. And on turn 2, you have a 5/4 in space and a 1/1 on the ground. Again, assuming your opponent doesn't interact with that in any way. Seems decent. I think the fact that this is space does give it a bit of a shot in constructed. Now, the Tactical Droid Commander. This is a 5-cost Cunning Villainous. 4/4 Separatist droid unit with exploit 2, so he can cost as low as 1. When you play another Separatist unit, you may exhaust a unit that costs the same or less than that played unit. And this is cool. The resource cost lines up very, very neatly with the turn 2 turn sequence. If you play one of these relevant 1-drops with the on-defeat trigger, like the Wartime Official or the OOM Series Officer, it means you can play this for 3 resources on turn 2, then you get that on-defeat trigger and you have a 4/4 left over, with a pretty decent ability. Just being able to tap down random things is not something you should be turning your nose up at. The fact that it works on units and not non-unit cards, like a lot of cards with this mechanic tend to use, is great. Plus, it's based on the cost of the unit card, not what you paid for it. So if you get to then exploit larger big units, guess what? The number printed on the card is the cost that you're referring to for this trigger. Even if you play Gore for 6, guess what? He costs 12 for the purpose of this card. So if you manage to play him after this, well, guess what? He's tapping down any unit that your opponent can play. Not that I think this is necessarily a great card to play alongside Gore. I'm just talking about like the best upside. Realistically, I think this is going to go into your more mid-rangey exploit decks, things that are playing maybe the Squadron of Vultures, Asajj Ventress, you know, those kinds of cards that just give you good solid value in the early mid-game. And that's just really, really nice that that ability works so cleanly with exploit. And it has exploit on it. Decent body. Yeah, I think if there is a yellow exploit deck, this is going to be played in that deck for sure. We also had Calculating Magna Guard. Now, this is an interesting exploit payoff. And you might think, Nick, what are you talking about? That doesn't have exploit. It doesn't make a bunch of bodies. What are you talking about? It does have when a friendly unit is defeated as a trigger. And the best consistent way to do that is to use exploit cards. Plus, it also works when played as well. So it's a really decent 3-cost Sentinel unit. Most of the units we see around this kind of cost with Sentinel is usually like a 2/4 or something like that. That 1 extra power is something we shouldn't be turning our nose up at it. And the fact that it sort of is a trade-off for the fact that it doesn't always have Sentinel, but it's something that you can build around and trigger pretty consistently anyway, I think is pretty decent. I like both of these exploit build-around cards in blue. It'll be interesting to see that deck actually does come together, but yeah, might be okay. Lastly, we have an event, Wartime Profiteering, a 1-cost Cunning Villainous Supply. Look at cards from the top of your deck equal to the number of units that were defeated this phase. Draw 1 and put the other on the bottom of your deck in a random order. And I think if we were just going to play a card like this, right now in the second set meta, this would be a pretty average card. But considering, you know, the potential for token spam, exploit, all those kinds of things, having lots of units defeated in one phase doesn't seem unrealistic. Especially situations where you can exploit as soon as turn 2, and you're looking at like potentially swinging in, maybe nugging one of your opponent's units, maybe, you know, doing a nice effective trade. Perhaps you play the Wartime Trade Officer, you swing him in turn 2, and you trade off with one of your opponent's units, and you use the battle droid that's left over to exploit out another unit. And you use the battle droid unit to, say, exploit out an Asajj Ventress for a cost of 2, and then you play this with the 1 remaining resource. That means 3 units have been defeated this turn, and you get a nice bit of card selection on top of an Asajj Ventress. That's a very nice play pattern in my opinion. But in all seriousness, I think people need to sort of be aware of the potential downside of a card like this. Know that situation I just described isn't going to happen all the time. I think this is going to be a card that leans into constructed viability more than anything else. In draft, you know, setting up those kinds of scenarios is going to be a bit more difficult. But it is cheap, it's a nice bit of card selection, so I do like that. Alright, looking at a couple more green Separatist cards. These are sort of advantageous for your go-wide strategy in Kalani and Magna Guard Wing Leader. Kalani is a 6-cost green and black 5/7 Separatist droid unit. On attack, you may choose another unit. If you have the initiative, you may choose up to 2 other units instead. Give each of the chosen units +2/+2 this phase. Magna Guard Wing Leader is a 3-cost command, villainous 3/4 Separatist vehicle fighter unit. And as an action, attack with a droid unit, then attack with another droid unit. Use its ability only once each phase. Kalani's interesting, a 6-cost that sort of leans into you having the initiative. Not bad, actually. Tends to be a case when you play more expensive units, you tend to have less game actions because you're not playing multiple cards per turn. So getting the initiative isn't totally unreasonable. Even if you aren't getting the initiative, on attack, give something else +2/+2. Seems good. It means your tokens can trade up pretty effectively. Or if you play this alongside overwhelmed stuff, like if you play this in a Maul deck, for example, this card just seems absurd. You're doming your opponent's base for way more on this attack trigger. Just be aware, it is a 6-drop and it has a non-attack trigger. It comes out fairly late and doesn't get you that value until the turn after. So you've got to sort of temper your expectations a little bit. Unless, of course, you turbo this out on ECL, and this card might be absurd with ECL. You know, you get to turn 5, you have the initiative, you play this with ECL, and then you give 2 other units +2/+2. Yeah, it seems pretty good. Pretty good. Yeah, ECL. Might it be the game's first banning? I don't know. Answer in the comments. Answer in the comments on that one. Moving over to the Magna Guard Wing Leader. It's an important thing to note that this starfighter is not a droid. Yes, we do have other droid starfighters, but it means you have to have this in play and 2 other droids. Now, this doesn't have to be ready in order to use that action. It doesn't exhaust itself. It doesn't ask for any resource cost. You essentially get Princess Leia's ability, but on droids. That's actually a bit more desirable on a unit than it is on a leader, if I'm to be honest. It's a 3/4 space unit for 3. That seems okay. And if you're playing droid tokens, yeah, sure, why not? Maybe this works in an exploit deck if you want to sort of attack him with your tokens, nug your opponent's base a couple of times before you exploit them out for a larger unit. Could be okay. Honestly, I think this more plays into like your General Grievous plus Magna Guard deck. You know, playing with a bit better unit quality. You know, that deck's probably likely still going to play the Battle Droid Escort. You're going to have those lower cost tokens. But you're going to have the versatility with a card like this to be able to attack with things that trade profitably or can aggressively start moving units if they are just bigger and better at combat. All right, we're moving through this. 4 cards left. We can do it. We can do it. Let's look at Rush Clovis. I don't think this really effectively plays into like your exploit strategies per se, so I didn't include him in those groups. Rush Clovis is a 4-cost, cunning, villainous, 3/5 separatist official unit. Raid 2. And on attack, if the defending player controls no ready resources, create a Battle Droid tokens. And I think on the surface, this just feels like a bad Shark T, because Shark T doesn't ask you to have these hoops to jump through in order to make the token. She makes a better token, and she's also a lord for tokens in that she universally gives them a buff. But I think what's going on here is a bit of a lesson in color identity. The reality is Cunning doesn't get access to consistent creation of tokens. It more heavily leans into board manipulation, sort of these risk-reward triggers that pay off. So in terms of color identity, it's fantastic. Plus, you have to appreciate that the stat line is just better than Shark T. He attacks as a 5/5 with that raid too, so he just beats Shark T in combat. But having said that, it does feel kind of awkward. I guess, look, yellow-black with a decent stat line. Those stats probably means he plays fairly well in a Maul deck. And you know, if you do that build around, you get the 1/1 as a little bonus. The thing is, what I'm saying is, I don't think this is consistent enough to play in your exploit decks. Kind of like a more mid-rangey deck that just wants top-end finishes. Again, like your Maul deck, it's just got good stats and it might be okay in that. But it's not a card that wows me a lot. Next we have Zero the Hutt, and this has some real fun design. A 5-cost cunning, villainous, 2/8 underworld Hutt ground unit. 2 triggers. When played, for each opponent, you may exhaust a unit that player controls. And, on attack, for each opponent, you may exhaust a resource that player controls. Now this has Twin Suns written all over it. You get to manipulate 2 of your opponents at once. Having said that, I think there is arguably a case here for it to be constructed playable. It has a relevant build-around trait in Underworlds. Maybe this goes in like your Proxima, Greedo, McClunky style decks. We'll see if that deck can come together and want an effect like this. But this is a lot of fun. And it's a really fun character too. I think this character really sort of set the unserious tone of the Clone Wars cartoon and really sort of showed that the show and the movie wasn't taking itself too seriously. I do like what Zero did for like the overall canon of Star Wars, even if some people may think it's a bit cutesy and not like this kind of character. Really fun effect. Look, I don't know if it's sort of premiere playable, but really fun in Twin Suns and might be fun in like your more casual decks as well. All right, we're on to it. We're on to the 2 hype cards that were revealed in the last few days. Let's start off with the rare base that we saw. This is the green base in this set's cycle of rare bases. It only has 24 HP, which is the lowest we've seen so far. When you deploy your leader, create 2 battle droid tokens. And I am curious about this. Yes, in Twin Suns, you get that trigger twice, and that's really, really cool, but you're also playing a 24 HP deck in Twin Suns, and that can suck as well. It is really heavily leaning into green, which might just be this ultimate unit spam color. That is basically the identity that we're seeing that can generate tokens. Maybe your exploit decks want this, maybe your coordinate decks want this, but I think the big problem with that way of thinking is those decks can also just play ECL, and oh, it's a big ask. It's a really big ask, getting those decks to play this over ECL. It gives you 1 less hit point, and frankly, ECL in either of those decks just seems like it's going to play really, really well. Your exploit decks are going to play just big chonkers that are going to really benefit off that ambush trigger. We just saw one before that we were talking about, for example, in your heroic coordinate decks, and this is something I brought up before, being able to trigger coordinate on a card that has ambush is just going to be really, really, really powerful. So you play like a big top end card that has a coordinate payoff, say it gives them better combat effectiveness. It comes out of nowhere, and ECL is just going to be great with that. Even on a card like Captain Rex that just makes you a bunch of bodies, it just adds to the value of that card. 3 bodies and ambush, it's just great. There's at least one card in both of these decks that are just going to play so well with ECL, and I just don't think Droid Manufactory gets there. In terms of constructive Premier play, it is fun in a more casual setting. Look, if you get it in draft and you get a real solid coordinate or exploit payoff shell built in your draft, yeah, it's going to be great for that. I just think the best thing for the meta right now in terms of addressing the issue with ECL was giving green a competitive rare base. And look, maybe it is. Maybe ECL cops a banning, or it rotates out before this and this does become relevant. But I just don't think there's a shell for this. Okay, moving over to Padme, the new leader that we saw. And this is very, very interesting. It really, really tests the cost versus reward mechanic we have here. So her ability on the leader side is Coordinate. As an action, pay a resource and exhaust this leader. Search the top 3 cards of your deck for a Republic card, reveal it, and draw it. And she deploys when you have 5 resources. On that side, she is a 2/7. She's also a Naboo Republic official for when those things are relevant. Restore 1 and Coordinate, it's the same ability again. On attack, it's the same again, but just on the attack trigger. Search the top 3 cards of your deck for a Republic card, reveal it, and draw it. And I really want to stress with this card, it's a massive cost, but I think some people are seriously undervaluing the massive amount of card advantage and selection that Padme offers. It's just the one sticking point for me is that ability doesn't come into play until turn 3, realistically. Yes, it can theoretically come out on turn 2 if your opponent cheats on their resources by using like a Han leader and plays like Jesse to give you 2 tokens. Realistically, that's not going to happen in Premiere. Also, this card really does highlight my original feelings of Jesse. That's probably just an unplayable card with things like this floating around the meta. That's for your starter deck. Just keep that in your starter deck and just leave it there. But yeah, look, this is a card that really, really, really needs to heavily lean into triggering Coordinate. The payoff is repeatable card advantage and selection, and that's really, really cool. Oddly enough, to me, this is the kind of leader that really has to be playing double green to get access to manufactured soldiers. She might move into red, but then you don't get that raw token generation in red like you do in double green. I think of the shell that's going to play like the more aggressive coordinate decks with like your Echo, your Republic Tactical Officer, and I just don't think this is going to be the best unit for it. Look, there is a bit of a plus side in the fact that she does come out at 5 resources, meaning she can trigger Coordinate a lot more easily because, you know, the sooner you can deploy your leader, that is 1 more unit that counts towards Coordinate. And look, the effect is really, really good. I keep circling back to that. If you have repeatable card advantage and selection, you can really outclass your opponent in terms of the quality of cards that you're playing. I just don't know how much I can value that when it's so hard to activate. A leader that basically can't activate on turn 1 or 2, it feels like a very big ask. You know, maybe the ability is, it's just good enough that you're taking a bit of a hit in quality because her unit side is so much more valuable. Not having to invest any resources. By the time you get to deploying her, you should be triggering Coordinate pretty regularly. She's a 2/7, not the easiest leader to kill, especially not that early in the game. So it's not unreasonable to expect her to get 2 hits in at the very least and trigger that twice. And then when she comes back to the leader zone after being defeated, it's going to be much easier to trigger her ability and get repeatable instances of card selection. Is it going to be enough though? For my own sake, I really do value leaders that can give you those early game benefits, and it's asking a lot, but the trade-off is potentially very, very high. It's really difficult for me to evaluate this, and I guess I'm just going to have to see it on the table to see if it's any good. But I really like the flavour of this. I kind of wish Padme had a Naboo payoff instead of a Republic payoff, but that's okay. Maybe in other cards we'll say that, maybe in other leaders. Alright, we got through them. I will see you all again in a few days' time when there'll probably be another pile of cards to talk about. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope to see you all at Onyx Unlimited and the PQ we have in Melbourne next month. And I'll catch you all in the next video.